Hello, and welcome to another episode of Drive with Me. I really just kind of wanted to get directly into today's topic that I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is really the state of technology and the video game industry and how it reflects the kind of wider American economy and where we're at right now, right? I think this will be like the third video, I'm pretty sure, that I filmed generally on this topic. And it started, I don't know, a week or two ago, whatever it was, so I think it was July 1st, actually, when Sony announced that they were no longer going to be printing physical discs for games for their PlayStation platforms as of January of 2028, right? That was upsetting to me for several different reasons. And I've talked about those already. So I'm going to go real light touch on that kind of topic, especially for those that this may be the first video that they see. Basically, generally, while it's true that the digital information that is on a disk is the same as what would be saved to a hard drive or a solid state drive, and so functionally they are the same thing, what it largely comes down to for me is true ownership, right? Kind of like how Sony, I believe it's over in Europe. I don't think it really affects American consumers, but I believe my understanding is on their platform where they sell movies, right? They would sell digital licenses, and they're now, due to licensing conflicts, have removed or are going to remove, it's like 551, I believe, films that people have actually purchased. And now, if that license ends up being renewed and they negotiate a deal or what have you, I'm sure those people get that back, that access again. But if they don't, and while they don't, that's just not the case. Meanwhile, if you had that on disc, or if you bought those movies, whichever one of those 551 you might own, and it's on a disc, you don't have to worry about that. Similar with video games, but different. One, because platforms for video games are changing regularly. So you could play a DVD from 20 years ago in the early 2000s on a DVD or a Blu-ray player now, and it will still play, right? Video games don't work that way, as anyone that's been a console gamer knows, right? There is backwards compatibility, but it is often limited. It's often messy. There's often certain generations where it'll just stop. Like everything after the original PlayStation 3 models basically cut down on the kind of backwards compatibility that they had. So the original launch PlayStation 3 was backwards compatible with the PS2 and PS1. Then successive models were not, right? Were backwards compatible with the PlayStation 1, but not the 2. Then the PlayStation 4 wasn't backwards compatible directly with any of the others, and now the PS5 is only backwards compatible with the PS4, right? And then there's a lot of games that have been like released like via cloud gaming or remastered or what have you, right? In various ways ported over to like the PS4 or the PS5 and are now accessible via like PlayStation Plus as an example, right? That's just on the PlayStation side. Nintendo has its whole own issue. Microsoft has its whole own issue. There is no console platform or company wherein you can just access your entire library and pop a disc in to a current machine and play everything. And if you don't have a disc drive, you won't be able to do that with anything. It will be digital only. And those of us that have collected since we were kids, right, we already had to get used to the fact that switching from cartridges to discs meant none of those consoles were going to be backwards compatible with each other. Now we're having to get used to the idea that even discs are not going to be allowed anymore. And that's just kind of another notch in the belt of things that are irritating, that include like games not fully being on the disc anyway, or requiring a bunch of updates, or obviously DLC doesn't get written on there later, the stuff that comes out after the fact. And often games released in a fairly broken state nowadays, which means you need the updates, so you need the connection to the internet. And increasingly, discs are acting more like digital codes that confirm that it's a legitimate copy of the game and can be downloaded, but otherwise have little to no information on the disc. But still, a lot of them do. Not only that, you also have things like always online requirements. Like notoriously, one that really upsets me has been Diablo 4. There, in my opinion, is no reason why Diablo 4 could not function like Diablo 3 or Diablo 2 that I grew up playing, wherein there's an online component where you can play with friends, but there's also an offline component, and you don't need the internet to be able to enjoy the story-driven experience, right? Diablo 4 doesn't allow that. It is always online only, even if you're playing by yourself or with somebody else on your console, like you can play with two people. And my wife and I did that, and we had difficulty accessing it when our internet went, or we couldn't access it when the internet went down, even though we didn't want to play with anybody else, just two people on the same console, right? As an example. So there are a lot of these little, the nature of digital rights management, or what's often referred to as DRM, and always online and live service games, and the need to patch and update games that aren't really released in a fully completed or good state, and so on, has gotten to the point that the value of physical discs has been eroding anyway. And more people, myself included, have started buying certain games digitally. I've just been selective about what it is I buy digitally and where, right? So it's not that any of us, or most of us anyway, like I am not saying I want digital to go away. There are a lot of conveniences with it. But the lack of option to truly own something is really upsetting, because the big AAA games I'm going to go out and spend $70 on, or if, in the case of Grand Theft Auto 6 or Mario Kart World, $80 for these kinds of games, where the industry is likely going, $80 for a lot of these AAA games, and now we don't even get to fully own them. If they shut down the servers, or if there's a DDoS attack that takes down PlayStation Network, or whatever they're calling it now, etc., then you just can't access things. It's another thing. Another digital rights thing is often checking to verify that the game is legitimate. And apparently you increasingly need to do this even if the game is disc-based. You need to be able to verify it online before you get access to the game. So increasingly, our ownership rights and things that would have traditionally not been a problem, I can pop in my original Nintendo cartridges from over 30 years ago and still play them, right? I mean, it may not function super great, might need to blow into the cartridge, might need to replace the pin set or what have you, right? But nonetheless, which I've done, I've refurbed my Nintendo and it still functions and I can still play those games. Increasingly, I can't do that with modern consoles. 20 years from now, my PlayStation 5 is going to be a lot less usable than my Nintendo is, which is a problem, right? Like, so that it's a lot bigger than just discs or cartridges or physical media. It's more than that. So honestly, one of my big thoughts here is, if ownership is being treated like a luxury, then I don't believe that piracy of video games is a real crime, right? Especially for the sake of preservation. It's one thing if you're like, you can't be making money, like printing discs off of games that other people created and making money off of that. That's not okay, right? As far as I'm concerned, if you want to experience a game system that is no longer in production, games that are no longer in active production, I don't really care what the law says, to be entirely honest. For myself personally, I'm not recommending this specifically for anybody else, but I do not consider that something that is actually damaging. It's not hurting anyone. If there's a remastered version on a new console, I'll often turn around and buy it anyway, like I've done with like the Tomb Raider trilogy games and stuff like that as examples. And often it ends up functioning as kind of a test of like, is this a game I'd want to purchase anyway? And then if I do, then I will turn around and just buy the actual game, right? But a lot of how the modern digital marketplace is used by big publishers and stuff is to get us to buy these same games over and over again. Like, how many different copies do most people have of Grand Theft Auto 5 and Elder Scrolls, Skyrim and so on, right? It's just really common for them to kind of milk us for all we're worth, and Nintendo's one of the worst. But one thing I'll give Nintendo is at least they made a way for like physical game cards that at least function as keys that we can still trade and give to friends and that kind of thing for borrowing and whatever it is we might want to do with them. We still have that access, even if it's not in the form we'd prefer. So with Sony going full way of the dodo here with game discs within the next year and a half or so, less than, and Microsoft very overtly pushing for an all digital future. Really what's happening is it's not that gaming's going to die. More than likely PlayStation isn't going to really be even all that impacted, really, when all is said and done. But as one that is an older gamer, close to being in my 40s, I'm in my late 30s now, I've been collecting physical hardware and games for basically my entire life. And that will no longer be an option. And due to me, very obviously, not being much of a priority to these game companies, they're not going to be a high priority for me. What it really means is I'm mostly switching over to PC, which I already have a gaming laptop, so I'm going to just prioritize Steam and probably Nintendo games for the foreseeable future. And I've already been moving away from really using my Xbox much anyway. And my PlayStation will probably just be added to that list. So, what this means more than anything is that the nature of how many of us are going to be gaming in the future is going to be different. And as one that loves physical hardware and game consoles in addition to PC gaming, it's a little sad for me to see my options increasingly dwindle, but there's still a lot of competition on PC. Video games are still going to be awesome. There's still going to be really good developers out there. There's still going to be some good deals here and there, especially on platforms like Steam. And we're still going to be eating good as gamers and as people that enjoy entertainment. However, it's really disappointing to see where this is going. It just really is. It's sad to see that this is what's come of a hobby that so many of us have spent thousands of dollars and thousands of hours in. So all that to say, another consideration that I've had and what I'm honestly starting to think about is, in addition to moving more towards PC with Nintendo Switch on the side as my primary gaming mediums, also thinking about getting into like Evercade, right? And a lot of their like classic library stuff and their physical cartridges and their consoles that are geared towards more old school gamers. And I'm just realizing this industry isn't really built for me anymore, which is a kind of a sad realization, but they're moving on. And increasingly, I think they're not really built for the consumer at all. They're built for controlling the consumer. And I think it's time that those of us that are kind of aging out of being willing to accept a lot of these practices, I think we make a stand somewhere, right? We invest in other companies' products. We invest in PC hardware. It's ridiculous enough that it's going up. So the cost of these hardware devices related to memory is going up so dramatically. But what's nice is that Evercade doesn't compete on that high level in terms of memory requirements and so on. So they seem to be producing products that are notably less expensive. Like they have a Switch-like device that's coming out. I forget exactly what it's called, but it's retailing for $200, and they're not competing with a lot of these big players for that high-level memory. And because of that, they can kind of keep their prices down, right? At least that seems to be the case. That's my understanding of it. So as long as that continues, I don't see why they don't become an excellent option. You invest a little bit more in a PC, even if it's a gaming laptop like I did, kind of the cheaper way up front. You invest in a Switch 2, and then maybe at the tail end of the PS6 and Xbox whatever, Helix or whatever they end up calling it, generation, maybe there's a good enough deal that I'm like, okay, screw it. There's enough first party titles and experiences that I'll go ahead and grab it if the price ever goes down on it. Maybe. I'm not going to be one that swears off ever buying another PlayStation again if it doesn't have discs, but the reality is it's not going to be my primary gaming device. Like for the last couple of generations, since the end of the PlayStation 3 generation, my primary gaming hardware has been a PlayStation console, and that's not going to be the case anymore. So that is a little sad to me, but it is what it is. Like the world changes, life changes, and we got to change with it. So some options, I think, and ways to move forward. And, I think in the meantime, doing things like buying every game that you can on disc, if that's something you care about, and or protesting by like canceling your PlayStation Plus subscription or Game Pass or whatever the case may be. I think that's valid. I think that has a place for it. I don't think enough people are going to do it to really make that much of a difference, but we'll see. Maybe I'll be surprised. Maybe I'll be wrong. But anyway, thank you all for listening. If you made it this far, please feel free to like, and otherwise, I'll talk to you all later. Have a good one.